Welcome to Buried Truths, where the dust of time is swept away and history's deepest secrets rise to the surface. Adolf Hitler was born on April 20th, 1889, in Braunau am Inn, a small town in Austria-Hungary near the German border. His father, Alois Hitler, was a stern and authoritative customs official, while his mother, Clara, was gentle and deeply devoted to her son. Adolf was the fourth of 6 children, but only he and his younger sister Paula survived into adulthood. Hitler's childhood was marked by a turbulent relationship with his father, who demanded discipline and had rigid expectations. Alois wanted Adolf to pursue a career in civil service, but the boy was more drawn to art, architecture, and the romantic ideals of German nationalism. The conflict between father and son intensified during Adolf's teenage years. In school, Hitler performed poorly in subjects that didn't interest him, but excelled in drawing and history. His teachers noted his talent for art and his strong opinions, even at a young age. When he was just 13, his father died, and 3 years later, he lost his mother to breast cancer, a traumatic event that left a deep emotional scar. In 1907, Hitler moved to Vienna with hopes of becoming a professional artist. He applied twice to the Academy of Fine Arts Vienna, but was rejected both times, being told he lacked the necessary talent. These rejections devastated him. During this period, he lived in poverty, staying in men's hostels and surviving on a small orphan's pension and casual labor. While in Vienna, Hitler's worldview began to form. The city was a melting pot of cultures, ethnicities, and political ideologies. He developed a growing disdain for the diverse population, especially Jews, whom he began to blame for the social and economic problems he observed. Although he would later claim that his anti-Semitic beliefs took root in Vienna, historians debate whether his hatred was fully developed at this stage. He also became increasingly absorbed in German nationalist ideology, even though he was an Austrian citizen. He read nationalist newspapers and pamphlets that promoted ideas of racial purity, anti-Semitism, and the superiority of the German people. Influenced by pan-German thinkers like Georg von Schönerer and Karl Lueger, Hitler started to believe in the concept of a united German Reich that excluded Jews and other minorities. Between 1909 and 1913, Hitler lived a lonely, directionless life in Vienna. He often visited the opera and admired the works of Richard Wagner, whose themes of Germanic myths and heroes resonated deeply with him. He also became obsessed with the idea of destiny and personal greatness, believing he was meant for something far beyond an ordinary life. In 1913, Hitler left Vienna and moved to Munich, Germany, partly to avoid conscription into the Austrian military, which he loathed. He arrived in Germany with no clear plan or profession, but with a growing sense of ideological purpose. He felt more at home in Germany than in multi-ethnic Austria and dreamed of a Germany that would rise again as a dominant world power. Just a year after his arrival in Munich, World War I broke out. Hitler volunteered to serve in the German army and was accepted, marking a turning point in his life. His experiences during the war would further shape his worldview and set him on the path toward political extremism. Adolf Hitler entered World War I in 1914 as a volunteer in the Bavarian army. Despite being an Austrian citizen, he was accepted, largely due to a clerical oversight. For Hitler, the war offered a sense of purpose and belonging he had never felt before. He saw it as an opportunity to serve the German Empire and fulfill his growing sense of national duty. He was assigned to the 16th Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment and served as a dispatch runner, a role that kept him close to the front lines. He participated in major battles such as the First Battle of Ypres, the Battle of the Somme, and Passchendaele. While many soldiers found the trenches horrifying, Hitler thrived in the harsh conditions and was noted for his bravery under fire. During the war, Hitler was wounded twice. In 1916, he was injured in the leg during the Battle of the Somme and was sent to a field hospital to recover. Later, in October 1918, he was temporarily blinded in a mustard gas attack near Ypres. While recovering in a military hospital in Passewalk, he received news of Germany's defeat and the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II. The humiliation of Germany's surrender left a deep psychological impact on him. Like many soldiers, Hitler was shocked by the outcome of the war. He believed Germany had been stabbed in the back by politicians, communists, and Jews, a belief widely promoted by right-wing nationalists at the time. This myth, though baseless, became central to Hitler's ideology in the years to come. It allowed him to shift blame from the military failure to internal enemies, further fueling his hatred. Hitler remained in the army after the war ended in November 1918. Germany had just signed the armistice, and the Treaty of Versailles was in the process of being formulated. The treaty would impose harsh penalties on Germany, including territorial losses, disarmament, and crippling reparations. For many Germans, including Hitler, it was a national humiliation. The Weimar Republic, formed in the wake of the monarchy's collapse, faced immediate challenges. Economic instability, hyperinflation, and political violence plagued the fledgling democracy. In this chaos, extremist ideologies found fertile ground. Many war veterans, disillusioned and angry, felt betrayed by the government and were attracted to radical political movements. In 1919, while still serving as a military informant, Hitler was ordered to attend a meeting of the German Workers' Party, DAP, a small nationalist and anti-Semitic group. He found their ideas aligned with his own and joined shortly afterward. Within a year, he had risen to become one of its most prominent speakers, known for his passionate rhetoric and ability to rouse crowds. Hitler's oratory skills became his most potent weapon. He spoke with intensity and conviction, channeling the grievances of the masses into fiery speeches that targeted Jews, communists, and the Weimar politicians. His speeches tapped into public resentment and fear, blaming Germany's defeat and decline on scapegoats and promising a return to national greatness. The DAP was soon renamed the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party. Under Hitler's influence, it developed a more structured ideology that combined extreme nationalism, racial purity, anti-communism, and a rejection of the Treaty of Versailles. The party also adopted the swastika as its symbol, representing the rebirth of Germany. Between 1920 and 1923, the Nazi Party rapidly gained followers, especially among the working class, war veterans, and nationalist youth. Hitler's charisma and message of restoring German pride struck a chord in a country desperate for stability and leadership. He also began forming paramilitary units, such as the SA Sturmabteilung, to protect party meetings and intimidate opponents. Inspired by Mussolini's march on Rome, Hitler decided to attempt a coup. In November 1923, he and his followers launched the Beer Hall Putsch in Munich, trying to overthrow the Bavarian government. The coup failed, and Hitler was arrested and charged with treason. However, the trial gave him a national platform to spread his ideas. During his trial, Hitler used the courtroom as a stage to present himself as a patriot. Rather than denying his actions, he claimed responsibility and justified them as an attempt to save Germany. His defiance earned him admiration from many Germans, and the judge handed down a relatively light sentence: 5 years in prison, of which Hitler would serve only 9 months. While imprisoned at Landsberg prison, Hitler began writing Mein Kampf, My Struggle, a manifesto combining autobiography with his political ideology. In it, he laid out his belief in Aryan supremacy, anti-Semitism, and the need for Lebensraum, living space for the German people to expand eastward. Though few read the book initially, it would later become the ideological blueprint for the Nazi regime. Hitler emerged from prison in 1924 more determined than ever to achieve power, but now through legal means rather than revolution. The failure of the putsch had taught him that seizing power in Germany would require manipulating the system from within, not overthrowing it by force. He began to rebuild the Nazi Party with a new strategy, setting the stage for the next phase of his rise. After emerging from prison in December 1924, Adolf Hitler returned to a dramatically changed Germany. The economy had stabilized under the Dawes Plan, and the Weimar Republic had entered what became known as its golden years. Extremist parties, including the Nazis, had lost momentum. Hitler, now banned from public speaking in several German states, faced the challenge of reviving a movement that seemed to be fading into irrelevance. Rather than resorting to revolution again, Hitler shifted strategies. He decided to gain power through legal means, by winning votes and using the democratic system to dismantle democracy from within. He began to rebuild the Nazi Party, focusing on organization, propaganda, and outreach. In 1925, Hitler refounded the Nazi Party and created a new party structure. He formed the SS, Schutzstaffel, as an elite paramilitary unit loyal only to him, separate from the rowdy SA. The SS would later become central to the Nazi regime's machinery of repression. Hitler also established regional party leaders, or Gauleiters, to spread Nazi ideology and maintain party discipline across Germany. Propaganda became central to Hitler's new approach. He hired Joseph Goebbels in 1926 to oversee party messaging. Goebbels was a master manipulator of public opinion, and he crafted a powerful image of Hitler as Germany's savior. Nazi rallies, posters, and slogans were designed to appeal emotionally to a wide spectrum of Germans, especially the unemployed, veterans, and youth. Despite the party's growing structure, the Nazis remained a minor force in German politics during the late 1920s. In the 1928 Reichstag elections, the Nazi Party won only 12 out of 491 seats. Hitler viewed the result as disappointing, but he remained confident. He knew that the party's message would resonate more deeply during times of crisis. The Wall Street crash of 1929 and the ensuing Great Depression offered Hitler the opportunity he had been waiting for. Germany, heavily reliant on American loans, was hit hard. Unemployment soared to over 6 million, banks collapsed, and poverty gripped the nation. In this atmosphere of fear and desperation, extremist parties found renewed support. Hitler blamed Germany's woes on the failures of the Weimar Republic, the Treaty of Versailles, and the alleged conspiracies of Jews and communists. His message of national revival and strong leadership found eager listeners. The Nazis framed themselves as the only alternative to chaos, promising jobs, order, and restored pride. The Nazi Party's popularity skyrocketed. In the July 1930 elections, they won 107 seats, making them the second-largest party in the Reichstag. Hitler's charisma, combined with Goebbels' propaganda machine, turned him into a national figure. His speeches were broadcast on radio and printed in mass publications, creating a cult of personality. Meanwhile, the democratic institutions of the Weimar Republic were collapsing under internal pressure. Between 1930 and 1933, a series of short-lived chancellors failed to stabilize the government. Presidents relied increasingly on emergency decrees under Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution, bypassing parliamentary democracy. Hitler began receiving support from conservative elites who viewed him as a bulwark against communism. Industrialists, military leaders, and right-wing politicians believed they could control him and use his popularity to maintain their own power. Among them were figures like Franz von Papen, who played a key role in brokering Hitler's appointment as chancellor. In the July 1932 elections, the Nazis became the largest party in the Reichstag with 230 seats. However, President Paul von Hindenburg, who distrusted Hitler, refused to name him chancellor. The political stalemate deepened. Hitler demanded full control. Hindenburg resisted. In response, Nazi paramilitaries intensified street violence, while the party's propaganda fueled nationwide unrest. Despite losing some seats in the November 1932 elections, the Nazis remained dominant. Political intrigue among conservatives and the fear of communist revolution pushed Hindenburg's advisors to reconsider. Von Papen convinced Hindenburg that appointing Hitler as chancellor in a coalition government would stabilize the country and that Hitler could be easily controlled. On January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. He stood on the balcony of the Reich Chancellery with President Hindenburg, saluting a torch-lit parade of SA members. The moment marked the beginning of the end for the Weimar Republic. Though Hitler had not seized power by force, he now held the reins of government. Hitler immediately began to consolidate power. Within weeks, he demanded new elections, hoping to secure a Nazi majority. On February 27, 1933, the Reichstag building was set on fire. A Dutch communist, Marinus van der Lubbe, was arrested at the scene, and the Nazis used the incident to justify mass arrests of communists and socialists. The following day, Hitler persuaded Hindenburg to sign the Reichstag fire decree, which suspended key civil liberties including freedom of speech, press, and assembly. It allowed the government to arrest political opponents without trial. In the March 1933 elections, the Nazis increased their share of the vote, though still lacked an outright majority. To eliminate opposition, Hitler introduced the Enabling Act on March 23, 1933, with support from conservative and Catholic parties, and, after intimidating dissenting deputies, he secured the two-thirds majority required. The act gave him dictatorial powers and allowed him to pass laws without parliamentary consent. The passage of the Enabling Act marked the formal end of democracy in Germany. From this point forward, Hitler ruled as a totalitarian dictator. Political parties were banned, trade unions dissolved, and opposition silenced. Germany had been transformed from a republic into a one-party fascist state under Nazi rule. After the passage of the Enabling Act in March 1933, Hitler moved quickly to solidify his control over the German state. The democratic structures of the Weimar Republic had been destroyed, and the groundwork for a totalitarian regime was being laid. One of Hitler's first priorities was to eliminate any potential opposition. Political parties were banned, starting with the Communist Party, which had been a major rival to the Nazis. The Reichstag fire decree had already authorized the arrest of communist leaders, and now the Nazis moved to ban the Social Democratic Party, SPD, and other left-wing political organizations. The Night of the Long Knives in June 1934 marked the next major step in Hitler's consolidation of power. The SA, which had been instrumental in helping Hitler rise to power, was now seen as a potential threat to his leadership. Ernst Röhm, the head of the SA, had ambitions to make it a more powerful force, and this posed a direct challenge to Hitler's control over the military. Hitler also feared that the SA's radicalism could alienate conservative elites who had supported his rise. Under the pretext of eliminating a potential coup, Hitler ordered a purge of the SA leadership. Röhm and other top SA officials were arrested and executed. The Night of the Long Knives also served to placate the military, which was growing increasingly concerned with the SA's growing power. The military now pledged its loyalty to Hitler, and in return, Hitler promised to honor their traditional role in German society. With the military on his side, Hitler turned to the German state apparatus. One of the first steps was the creation of the Gestapo, the secret police. Established in 1933, the Gestapo was tasked with rooting out and eliminating all forms of opposition to the Nazi regime. It had the power to arrest anyone suspected of disloyalty to the state, and its activities would become a key tool in the creation of the totalitarian state. The SS, originally created as Hitler's personal bodyguard, grew in power and importance. Under the leadership of Heinrich Himmler, the SS took on more responsibility, becoming the primary institution responsible for carrying out Hitler's policies of repression and terror. The SS ran the concentration camps, where political opponents, Jews, and other undesirables were sent to be imprisoned, tortured, and eventually killed. Hitler also focused on creating a unified national community, or Volksgemeinschaft, in TU, which all Germans were to be united under the ideals of Nazi ideology. This meant not only eliminating political and social opposition, but also targeting minority groups, particularly the Jewish population, whom the Nazis viewed as the root of all evil. In 1935, the Nuremberg Laws were passed. These laws stripped Jews of their citizenship, forbade intermarriage between Jews and non-Jews, and placed restrictions on their employment. The Nuremberg Laws marked a significant step in the Nazis' systematic discrimination against Jews, which would eventually lead to the Holocaust. With the legal apparatus in place, Hitler turned his attention to the economy. His goal was to make Germany self-sufficient and to prepare for war. The four-year plan, initiated in 1936, aimed to ensure that Germany could be fully prepared for war within 4 years. This included the militarization of the economy, the construction of new weapons, and the expansion of the military-industrial complex. Under the direction of Hermann Göring, the plan helped to reduce unemployment and kick-started the German economy, but it also laid the foundation for the aggression that would lead to World War II. Meanwhile, Hitler's foreign policy was becoming more aggressive. The Nazis had always rejected the Treaty of Versailles, which they saw as a humiliation of Germany. Hitler's goal was to overturn the treaty and expand Germany's territory. The reoccupation of the Rhineland in 1936, a direct violation of the Versailles Treaty, was the first major step in this direction. The reoccupation of the Rhineland was a bold gamble, but it was met with little resistance from France or Britain, who were more focused on domestic issues than international diplomacy. The creation of the Nazi state was also marked by the glorification of Hitler as the Führer, the ultimate authority and symbol of German unity. Hitler's image was omnipresent in Nazi Germany, from public statues to school textbooks to state propaganda. His speeches were broadcast on the radio, and he was portrayed as the savior of the German people, a man who would restore Germany's greatness and lead it to its rightful place in the world. By the mid-1930s, Hitler had transformed Germany into a totalitarian state where opposition was crushed, dissent was punished, and all aspects of life were controlled by the Nazi Party. The creation of the Nazi state was a carefully orchestrated process combining legal measures, political maneuvering, and violent repression. It was a system in which Hitler's will was the law, and those who stood in his way were swiftly eliminated. Hitler's creation of the Nazi state was a triumph of authoritarianism, but it would ultimately lead to catastrophic consequences for Germany and the world. The seeds of World War II were being planted, and the horrors of the Holocaust were still to come. Yet for the moment, Hitler's grip on power seemed unshakable. As Hitler's grip on power tightened, his ambitions extended beyond the borders of Germany. The aggressive foreign policy he championed was driven by the idea of creating Lebensraum, or living space, for the German people. This expansionist ideology sought to reclaim land from Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, and to restore Germany's status as a dominant European power. One of Hitler's first major foreign policy actions was the reoccupation of the Rhineland. In 1936, the Rhineland had been demilitarized under the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, but Hitler saw it as a key part of his plans for territorial expansion. The remilitarization of the Rhineland was a direct violation of the treaty, and it was a bold move by Hitler. However, the response from France and Britain was muted at best. No military intervention was mounted, and Hitler's gamble paid off. The reoccupation of the Rhineland strengthened Hitler's position domestically, as it gave the appearance of a leader restoring Germany's dignity and power. Following this success, Hitler turned his attention to Austria. In 1938, he began pushing for the annexation of Austria, which he viewed as a part of the Greater German Reich. Austria had a significant German-speaking population, and Hitler considered the country a natural ally. The Anschluss was the term used for the unification of Germany and Austria, and Hitler worked with Austrian Nazis to stage a coup. On March 12, 1938, German troops marched into Austria, and within days, Austria was fully incorporated into Nazi Germany. The international community reacted with little more than verbal protests, and Austria's annexation marked another significant step in Hitler's expansionist ambitions. Meanwhile, Hitler had begun to target Czechoslovakia, which was home to a significant ethnic German minority in the region of Sudetenland. In 1938, Hitler demanded that Czechoslovakia cede control of the Sudetenland to Germany, claiming that the ethnic Germans living there were being oppressed by the Czechoslovak government. The international response was again weak, with Britain and France hoping to avoid war through appeasement. The Munich Agreement, signed in September 1938, allowed Hitler to annex the Sudetenland in exchange for a promise of no further territorial expansion. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain famously declared that the agreement had secured peace for our time. But this concession was a mistake. Hitler had no intention of stopping at the Sudetenland. Within months, the Nazis had moved into the rest of Czechoslovakia, violating the Munich Agreement and further exposing the failure of appeasement. The Munich Agreement was a pivotal moment in the lead-up to World War II. It revealed the weakness of Western democracies and showed Hitler that he could expand without facing serious consequences. At the same time, it emboldened him, making him more determined to continue his aggressive foreign policy. In 1939, Hitler's expansionist ambitions reached their zenith with the signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with the Soviet Union. This non-aggression pact, named after the foreign ministers of Germany and the Soviet Union, Vyacheslav Molotov and Joachim von Ribbentrop, shocked the world. The pact included a secret protocol that divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence, allowing Germany to invade Poland without fear of Soviet intervention. On September 1, 1939, Hitler's forces invaded Poland, marking the beginning of World War II. The invasion was swift and brutal, with the use of blitzkrieg tactics, a combination of fast-moving infantry, tanks, and airstrikes designed to overwhelm the enemy. Within days, Germany had captured much of Poland. The attack on Poland prompted Britain and France to declare war on Germany, officially starting World War II. The invasion of Poland was a culmination of Hitler's aggressive foreign policy. It was a clear sign that he was willing to use military force to achieve his territorial goals, and it marked the beginning of a conflict that would engulf Europe and the rest of the world. The road to war had been paved by a series of bold moves, miscalculations, and a refusal to back down from his ambitions. By the time World War II began, Hitler had successfully transformed Germany into a militarized state, with an army poised for conquest. His actions would soon lead to the destruction of much of Europe, the death of millions, and the devastation of Germany itself. But for the moment, Hitler was confident, convinced that his vision of a greater Germany was within reach. In the first years of World War II, Hitler's military campaigns seemed unstoppable. The combination of innovative tactics, superior technology, and the overwhelming power of the Wehrmacht led to rapid and decisive victories across Europe. However, as the war progressed, cracks began to appear in Germany's seemingly invincible war machine. After the invasion of Poland, Hitler turned his attention westward. In the spring of 1940, Germany launched its invasion of France, a campaign known as the Battle of France. Using blitzkrieg tactics once again, the Germans quickly overran Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg before attacking France itself. The speed and intensity of the German advance caught the French and their British allies off guard. In just 6 weeks, the Germans had reached Paris, and on June 22, 1940, France signed an armistice with Germany, effectively ending the war in Western Europe. The fall of France was a humiliation for the Allies, but it was a monumental victory for Hitler. The Third Reich now controlled most of Western Europe, from the Atlantic coast to the borders of Germany. Hitler, however, was not content with just controlling Europe's western half. His next target was Britain. In the summer of 1940, Hitler ordered the Battle of Britain, a campaign designed to break British resolve and prepare the way for an eventual German invasion. The Luftwaffe, Germany's Air Force, launched devastating air raids on Britain, targeting cities, infrastructure, and military installations. For weeks, London and other major cities endured relentless bombing, with civilians bearing the brunt of the attacks. Despite the heavy losses, Britain stood firm, with the Royal Air Force, RAF, managing to repel the German attacks. The Battle of Britain was a turning point in the war. For the first time, Hitler's forces had been stopped. The failure to defeat Britain forced Hitler to reconsider his plans for Western Europe. Instead of launching an invasion, Hitler shifted his focus to the east, where his ambitions were still far from being realized. In June 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. This was the largest military campaign in history, involving over 3 million German soldiers and massive mechanized forces. The operation was intended to capture the Soviet Union's vast territory and resources, but it also reflected Hitler's deep-seated hatred of communism and his desire to eradicate it. At first, Operation Barbarossa seemed to be a tremendous success. The German army advanced rapidly, capturing large portions of Soviet territory and inflicting heavy losses on the Red Army. However, the Soviets proved to be resilient, and the harsh Russian winter set in, halting the German advance. The battle for Stalingrad in late 1942 marked a significant turning point. The Germans, who had advanced deep into Soviet territory, were surrounded and decisively defeated by the Soviet forces. The Battle of Stalingrad became one of the most brutal and pivotal confrontations of the war, and it marked the beginning of a long and costly retreat for the German army. As the war intensified, Hitler found himself facing increasingly difficult challenges on multiple fronts. The entry of the United States into the war in December 1941, following the attack on Pearl Harbor by Japan, further complicated Germany's situation. With the U.S. now actively involved in the war, the Allies had access to immense resources, including manpower, materials, and industry. In the years following 1941, the war in Europe became a grinding, attritional conflict. The Allies launched a series of offensives in North Africa, Italy, and France, while the Soviet Union pushed the Germans back on the Eastern Front. Hitler's strategic decisions grew increasingly erratic as he attempted to maintain control of the situation. The failure of the German offensive at Stalingrad was followed by a series of defeats in North Africa, where Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps was forced to retreat, and in Italy, where the Allies began their invasion in 1943. By the time 1944 arrived, the tide of the war had firmly turned against Germany. On June 6, 1944, the Allies launched D-Day, a massive invasion of German-occupied France. The landings in Normandy were a pivotal moment in the war, as it opened a second front in Western Europe and began the liberation of France. With the Soviet Red Army pushing from the east and the Allies advancing from the west, Germany found itself surrounded on all sides. Hitler's grip on power was beginning to weaken. As defeat loomed, he became more desperate, launching ill-fated offensives such as the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. Despite initial successes, these last-ditch efforts could not prevent the inevitable collapse of Nazi Germany. By early YS 1945, the Allies were closing in on Berlin, and Hitler's hopes for victory had faded. The once feared leader now faced the consequences of his ambition, as the destruction he had wrought upon Europe became undeniable. By early 1945, the war was lost. Germany's once proud military was crumbling under the relentless pressure of the Allies from the west and the Soviet Red Army from the east. As the Allies advanced toward Berlin, Hitler, isolated in his bunker beneath the Reich chancellery, found himself facing the consequences of his ambition and megalomania. Hitler's final days were marked by a series of desperate, erratic decisions. He refused to admit defeat, even as the situation grew increasingly dire. The Allies had crossed the Rhine, and American and British forces were pushing into Germany from the west. To the east, the Soviets had already captured large portions of Poland and were advancing rapidly toward the German heartland. In Berlin, the situation was dire. The streets of the capital were being bombed by Soviet artillery, and the city itself was encircled by Soviet forces. Hitler had only a handful of troops left to defend his city. Despite the overwhelming odds, he refused to abandon his post and sought to continue the war until the last possible moment. He believed that a miracle could still turn the tide, but the reality was that Germany was on the brink of total collapse. As the Soviets closed in on Berlin, Hitler's inner circle began to fragment. His trusted generals and advisors, many of whom had become disillusioned with the Führer's leadership, began to abandon him. Even some of his closest allies, such as Joseph Goebbels and Heinrich Himmler, saw the writing on the wall and began to prepare for their own survival. On April 29, 1945, as the Soviets advanced on Berlin, Hitler married his longtime companion, Eva Braun, in a small ceremony within the bunker. The wedding was a final attempt to hold on to some semblance of normalcy in the face of the impending collapse. For both Hitler and Braun, the ceremony would prove to be their last. The following day, on April 30th, 1945, as Soviet forces were only a few blocks away from the bunker, Adolf Hitler took his own life. He consumed a cyanide pill and shot himself in the head. Eva Braun, his wife, also took cyanide and died alongside him. Their deaths marked the official end of the Nazi regime. Hitler's body was discovered by his staff, and it was quickly removed from the bunker. In an effort to prevent his body from being captured by the Soviets, the remains were burned. However, despite the destruction, the Soviet forces would later recover the remains and conduct an autopsy. Following Hitler's death, the Nazi regime continued to resist, but it was clear that Germany's fate was sealed. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, appointed by Hitler as his successor, attempted to negotiate peace with the Allies, but the war in Europe officially ended on May 7, 1945, when Germany surrendered unconditionally. This marked the end of Adolf Hitler's dream of a 1,000-year Reich and the collapse of Nazi Germany. The consequences of Hitler's actions were catastrophic. The war had resulted in the deaths of millions of people, including 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. Entire cities and countries had been destroyed, and Europe lay in ruins. The world would never be the same again. After his death, Hitler's legacy lived on in the memories of the devastation he had caused. His name became synonymous with evil and tyranny, and his regime left an indelible mark on history. The horrors of World War II, the Holocaust, and the brutal nature of Nazi ideology would serve as a powerful reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and totalitarianism. In the aftermath of the war, the Allied forces set about rebuilding Europe, leading to the establishment of the European Union and the beginning of the Cold War. The trials of the remaining Nazi leaders at the Nuremberg trials further exposed the extent of the atrocities committed by Hitler's regime and established a new standard for the prosecution of war crimes. Adolf Hitler's impact on the world is profound and enduring. His actions led to the deaths of millions, the destruction of entire cities, and the reshaping of the global political landscape. The rise and fall of Hitler serve as one of history's most devastating cautionary tales, warning of the dangers of unchecked power, ideological extremism, and the dehumanization of entire groups of people. The immediate aftermath of Hitler's death was the collapse of Nazi Germany and the beginning of the post-war reconstruction of Europe. The war crimes committed under Hitler's regime were exposed during the Nuremberg trials, where many of his closest allies were tried and convicted for their roles in the atrocities of the Holocaust and the broader war effort. These trials set a legal precedent for the prosecution of crimes against humanity, establishing a clear international stance on the accountability of individuals for war crimes. While the Nuremberg trials focused on prosecuting Nazi officials, the wider world grappled with the larger moral and societal implications of Hitler's actions. The Holocaust, the systematic extermination of 6 million Jews, remains one of the darkest chapters in human history. The atrocities committed during this period were so horrific that they changed the way the world viewed human rights, genocide, and the need for international laws to prevent such horrors from ever occurring again. In the decades following the war, Germany underwent a process of reconciliation, confronting its past in a bid to move forward. The German government has since made significant efforts to atone for the actions of the Nazi regime, including memorializing the victims of the Holocaust and promoting education about the horrors of Hitler's rule. The historical memory of Hitler's atrocities has played a significant role in shaping modern Germany's democratic values. The world also witnessed the rise of organizations such as the United Nations and the European Union, which were created to foster international cooperation and prevent the recurrence of such a devastating war. These institutions were established to promote peace, uphold human rights, and prevent future conflicts on the scale of World War II. However, the legacy of Hitler has not been easily erased. Neo-Nazi groups, far-right extremists, and individuals who admire Hitler's ideologies continue to exist today, though their numbers are relatively small. The modern world remains vigilant in combating these dangerous ideologies, and many countries have laws that make Holocaust denial illegal. The teaching of history, especially the events surrounding the rise and fall of Nazi Germany, remains a vital tool in preventing the spread of hatred and intolerance. On a global scale, the rise of Adolf Hitler led to significant geopolitical changes. The outcome of World War II set the stage for the Cold War, a period of intense rivalry between the Soviet Union and the United States. The division of Germany and the subsequent division of Europe into spheres of influence were direct results of the war's conclusion. Germany would remain divided until 1990, with the fall of the Berlin Wall symbolizing the end of the Cold War and the reunification of the country. The influence of Hitler's rise to power and the fall of the Nazi regime also played a role in shaping the global discourse on fascism and authoritarianism. Many countries and political leaders used the lessons of Hitler's rule to build safeguards against the rise of similar dictatorships in the future. The world's collective memory of World War II has been instrumental in promoting democratic values and resisting the allure of totalitarian regimes. In Germany, the post-war era saw a rethinking of national identity and pride. For many decades, the trauma of Hitler's reign was a burden that weighed heavily on the German people. However, over time, a new generation emerged that sought to honor the victims of the war while rebuilding their country into a democratic and peaceful nation. Adolf Hitler's legacy is one of darkness and destruction, but it is also a legacy of lessons learned. The world's reaction to his rise and fall has shaped the course of history, promoting the ideals of human rights, international cooperation, and the prevention of future atrocities. The horrors of the Holocaust and the devastation of World War II serve as a constant reminder of the fragility of peace and the dangers of unchecked power. The rise of Adolf Hitler is a story of ambition, manipulation, and deceit. His fall, marked by desperation, defeat, and death, is a reminder of the ultimate consequence of absolute power. Though Hitler's regime has long since fallen, his impact on history remains profound. The lessons learned from his rise and fall are lessons that the world must never forget, ensuring that such a tragedy is never repeated. If you're passionate about uncovering the forgotten stories of our past, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Don't forget to like the video if you're enjoying the journey so far, and stay tuned, because there's so much more history waiting to be unearthed right here on Buried Truths.